Shalom, it's Alizah with Morashali Village, and today I am shooting this video as a follow-up to a Facebook post I wrote about a week ago. So if you follow me on Facebook, I wrote a post, and it was basically just sharing a picture, a few timeline events, and a mapping exercise that my students were doing last week. So if you haven't been made aware, I am teaching a Ancient World History and Biblical Studies course this year, where my main goal is just to teach them ancient history with secular and biblical history as contemporary as I can make it for them. So I want them to really see it side by side. One reason for that is to strengthen the story, the biblical narrative, and also to see the interconnectedness of these people groups. So they tend to understand Egypt alone, even though it's mentioned in the scriptures, or they'll understand the Hebrew people alone, even though they're mentioned outside of the scriptures. And so I wanted them to be able to study the people groups that appear in the Hebrew scriptures in and outside of the scripture. And then I also wanted them to be able to study those same people and other people groups who are not mentioned in the Hebrew scriptures outside of the scriptures, so that they can have that history as well. So they kind of exist independent of each other, but also they see the cohesion between the two histories, if you will. Okay, so a lot of the feedback that I was asked, how are you connecting it all? How are you making it be as cohesive as it appears in the pictures and the information that you're sharing on Facebook? So I figured I would show you how I do that. Okay. One of the ways that I put it all together, excuse me, I'm looking down at the novel because I'm getting ready to introduce it, is with a novel. So I will put the picture up for the novel that we're reading right now, but it is called Mara, Daughter of the Nile. It's a very popular text, especially for reading Egyptian history. Now, we started obviously in what we understand the beginning. So we were in Mesopotamia. We learned about the Sumerians. We've learned about other people groups, and now the time period that we're in is in the New Kingdom age, if we're talking about Egyptian history. And we're meeting all kinds of pharaohs, right? We're learning about the Egyptians, their culture, their language, their way of life. We're also learning about the Hebrews, same thing, their culture, their language, way of life, etc. Right? And so they have a history that is very synced up. Like, you can even read the scriptures and you're going to see Hebrews and Egyptians. You can, read just you're going to read just Egyptian history, and you're going to see the Hebrews mentioned there also in their records. So one way to kind of pull that all together for students is with the novel. So one of the things that I have them doing is a lot of mapping. And so there's lots of geography skills, lots of mapping for our history skills. They're doing lots of timelining so that they can sync these things up. All right, so one of my main goals is I want them to be able to read about, learn about key people and places, and understand where they are in terms of time and locale. And so I'm going to show you how I did that, because that's what most of where most of the interest was, when I made that post. So we just so happened to be very early in the book when I made that post. I believe I was in chapters 3 through 5. So give me a second to pull that for you, and I'm just going to read a few excerpts and show you how that came together for them. So I'm going to load a map here soon. You'll see that loaded up, and then I'll be reading from the text. Okay, so one of the sentences says, "Together we subjugated the whole southern land of Nubia, even beyond the third cataract of the Nile." So if you're looking at the map, I stop, and make it very interactive for them as I'm reading. And I have them point, so where is the land of Nubia? So of course you can see it towards the bottom of the map or in the southern region, right? And so now I'm asking them, so why are they saying in the southern land of Nubia? Where are they? So we know the story, they're in Lower Egypt. Well, they're actually a little bit south of Lower Egypt, but even still, Nubia would be south for them. So I'm having them put that together. Then it goes further to say, even beyond the third cataract of the Nile. Well, where is the third cataract? Again, if you're looking at the map, you'll see it at the very, very bottom, right below Cush. Okay, and then of course the cataracts, they're, geographical features that run off of this river, the Nile. So I want them to see that as we're reading. So a lot of the connection that I make is, let's read the novel and then let's use the timeline, the map, what have you, to support it. Now, it will really, really help if you can pre-read the novel beforehand. And even if you can't read all of it, if you just read chapters ahead of them, you'll be able to plan and put things together. So I did not just open the book and go, oh wow, the Nile, let me go grab a map. No, I knew exactly which geographical features it was going to talk about. I knew which cities, which kingdoms, which pyramids, which pharaohs, etc. that the novel was going to talk about. And that is some of how I built my timeline. And it is pretty much mostly how I built our mapping. All right, so I'm going to move on. Another sentence says, together we rode northward against the Canaanites and gazed at last on the strange Euphrates, the river which flows the wrong way. So again, before we got to Egypt, we were in Mesopotamia, and so they know all about the Tigris and Euphrates river. So they instantly, oh, the Euphrates, But now we are at the Canaanites, and so in a previous map, so it won't be on this one, they've already, mapped where the Canaanites are in relationship to the Egyptians, right? And so another task that I want them to be able to do is understand who's telling the story by the language that the author or the writer is using. So Canaanites, I'm like, we've heard that before. Where have we heard that at? And they're like, oh, the Hebrews called these people Canaanites as well. And so now, I'm syncing that together for them. So now we have both the Egyptians and the Hebrews calling these people who live in Canaan, Canaanites, in which technically speaking, the Hebrews were living in Canaan for a very, very long time too. But obviously the Hebrews are calling a group outside of themselves, Canaanites as well. And so I wanted them to make that connection. All right, moving on, it says, together we returned to the black land with prisoners by the thousands. So if you're looking at the map again, you'll be able to see where the black lands are. And so I wanted them to be able to point to that. And of course, we have conversation and dialogue about what's going on, why this would be so, why would they name it this, what's special about this part of this land, etc. But I'm just kind of quickly reading some key sentences that actually tell of the geography that I'm having them map previously, but also they grabbed these maps and they had them as I was actively reading to them in order for that to come alive for them. Okay, moving on. Another sentence says, he rages like the leopard of Upper Egypt, and the he in this case is Thutmose. So people say Thutmose. And so I'll come back around to him in a little bit. But Upper Egypt, so I'm asking them, if you can look on the map, you'll see where Upper Egypt, they're pointing to it as they read. And of course, I've already explained why Upper Egypt is in the southern region and Lower Egypt is in the northern region. So you already understand that. But this is just how you connect it all together. So they're reading a story where they're hearing about the history. They're able to keep track of chronology, and I am going to talk about timelining after I talk about geography. And they're able to see it all come together. The people groups, the languages, the land, okay, and the history and the chronology. All right, another sentence says, her barge is at Abydos now. I may reach Thebes before her. So, of course, if you're looking at the map, you can see where Abydos is. You can see where Thebes is. And so I'm asking them, why are they, saying that? We know they're in Abydos now. And so, of course, they're able to put that together because Abydos is more north of Thebes, etc. All right, so they didn't have any issues with that, and a lot of them understanding the story is understanding the geography behind it. And so I do my best to give them as much geography as I can that makes sense prior to reading, but then also have them apply those skills as I'm reading so that it'll make sense for them. And then I do think I have one more. Oh yeah, in chapter 5, Let's see. They're just having a conversation about a particular shipment. And so it says, once in Thebes, I'll lay over for 5 days while a new cargo is making ready. Then I must deliver the shipment to Heliopolis or Polis, taking on timber there, which I will bring back to Abydos for the construction of and then the narrator interjects. Okay, so I had them, you can see the map, it's up there. I had them kind of finger trace this route. So, okay, he's here in Heliopolis, and then he goes where? And I kind of had them put this together so they can understand exactly where this shipment is going. All right? Now, another task that I want them to be able to do is identify foreign names, be it people or places, so that they can kind of make a judgment call as to who could have possibly came in to overpower them or oppress them or overtake them, right? And so they already know this. I'm just using some prior knowledge. So if your students don't know this will be a good time to add this in. But when our words end in P-O-L-I-S, I immediately said, which people group is this? And they were like, it's the Greeks, right? And so I'm like, is this city an indigenous name for this land? Absolutely not. So that's one of the skills that I want them to be able to have, is immediately looking at language and going, this must be Grecian, this must be Roman, this must be Egyptian, this must be whatever, right? Because they can recognize either some prefixes or suffixes in a particular name, be it the place or a person or a people group, right? But also that helps them understand time, the chronology of things. So if at this point in time, the capital or a city in Egypt has a Grecian name, what in the world has happened to Egypt? And where are we at in the timeline of history if this has already happened? All right, so now I want to shift from geographies to timelining. And I wrote some of the timeline entries that I put in that post because I didn't know that I would remember them all. So in this same week that we read about this stuff in our novel, we did some timelining. One of the entries we added to our timeline was the Hyksos seized control of Kemet/Egypt. And the reason I had them write Kemet/Egypt is because, again, I want them to understand the indigenous name of a land. What did these indigenous people refer to their land as? And so they understand the original inhabitants of Egypt would have called the land Kemet. But obviously Egypt is Grecian and that name still holds today. All right. So they understand, oh, well, they had control. Now, after that, we also added Hebrew bondage begins in Goshen. All right. Here's another city. And now an event that they need to be able to match up. Hebrew bondage in Goshen. Okay, so where is Goshen? Now I'm going to load the map back up, and they have mapped Goshen in previous maps. So this was something I wanted them to eyeball. It's not going to be on this map, but they already understand that Goshen is in the Nile Delta. And so the Nile Delta is on this map. So when I asked them, where is Goshen? They quickly pointed to the Nile Delta and they was like, it's right here. Exactly. And we have in both the Hebrew record and in the Egyptian record that when these Hebrews came into the land, they were given the choice part of the land, right? And so as they looked at this map, that was another thing that I had them to do. Think about all that needs to happen and all that needs to be present in order for the land to be fertile enough, moist enough, etc., to grow crops, to raise cattle, what have you. If you were looking at this map, what would be the choice part of the land? I mean, they instantly went to the water, right? That makes sense. So they instantly went there. I'm like, right, this is where the Hebrews were. They called it Goshen. Now, the Hebrews call it Goshen. So you may not hear Goshen being referred to, for this land at least. You're not going to hear that being referred to by persons who are not Hebrew, right? Because that's what they called the land. So now we need to know, what did other people groups living near or next to these Egyptians call this piece of land? So that was one of the things I had them add to their timeline. They put Goshen / Avaris. If you're reading the Hebrew scriptures, you are going to hear Goshen. If you're not reading the Hebrew scriptures, the odds of you hearing Goshen is going to be, slim. So I wanted them to understand that. Also, I asked them, what would the Hebrews have called this land? Mitzrayim. So here we have Kemet, Egypt, Mitzrayim, all the same land, but being referred to differently based upon the people group naming the land. That's very key for them. All right, the next timeline event that I had them to add was Moses is born. Right now, that's going to be, a biblical history timeline entry, but nonetheless, Moses is born. Now, one of the things that I have been doing with them, and I haven't kept track of every single pharaoh because it's a lot, but I have been teaching them about the rulership in Egypt, so they have some understanding of where they are in time if some key pharaohs are called out. So at this point, they know Amos, right? And then after Amos, they know Amenhotep the first. And so I have let them decide. So these are the dates. This is the dates that these pharaohs were in. This is the date that Moses was born, approximately. So which pharaoh was in leadership when Moses was born, right? Another key that we can look for and kind of fact check the Bible a little bit, and this is kind of what I had them to do. I'm like, well, what did the Pharaoh decree or declare during Moses' life, particularly the beginning, of his life, shortly after his birth? And of course, they're very familiar with the Hebrew story, so they're all like, there was a Pharaoh who put an edict to kill Hebrew baby boys, right? So let's look in Egyptian records and find out. We have this Pharaoh living in this timeline. Okay, let's find out if this Pharaoh also put out an edict for the killing of Hebrew baby boys. If we can find that, then we can kind of say, of all the pharaohs, this is likely the Pharaoh who was in leadership in Egypt when Moses was born. Okay, and so they made all kinds of connections. You'll have to teach this out, and do things, but the novel helps because it's giving you geography, it's giving you some chronology, it's giving you some of their culture and some places of people, names of people and places that you can, put together for them. And so this is how, I made the timeline. I knew the book was going to talk about certain things. And some of my timeline is just, entries I wanted them to know about, or that just some cool Egyptian things or some cool Hebrew things that I thought this would be good to know. But most of it is, coming from the text. All right, and then after that we have Thutmose or Tutmose. So we read about him a little bit, and I will just mention, I don't think it's his first mention, but it's pretty early on in the book. It talks about Hatshepsut. I hope I'm saying that right. Someone correct me if I'm not. And it talks about Thutmose. And so it says, Thutmose wants no barbarian for a wife. And so just off that name, again, remember when I told you I want them to be able to hear people and places and have some idea of chronology. So I'm like, all right, he said Thutmose. So where are we at in history? And so they were like, well, Thutmose comes after Amenhotep. So it's possible that this Pharaoh was alive during Moses' life or shortly thereafter. That's kind of like a quick assumption to make. Now, you are going to have to use the timeline to fact check that. But just from reading the book, they're like, okay, well, Thutmose came after Amenhotep. Okay, yeah, this is in that span of time, right? And so I want them to be able to do that. And then, of course, the book is also talking about Hatshepsut, and so they're familiar with her already, and they know the relationship between her and Thutmose, and so they were able to put some of those connections together too. Okay, so all in all, a novel helps. Novels are, great stories. Children will easily sit down and listen to stories. Adults will listen to stories. Whether you have them reading to themselves, reading to each other, you reading to them reading to you, it doesn't matter. The information of the novel is going forth. And as you meet key people and key places in a novel, stop and look at maps and timelines and show them what that means. If they already have enough prior knowledge, they can create their own timeline and maps, which is a lot of what they're doing in order to put it together. So they have a keepsake at the end of the year to say, wow, when I studied ancient and biblical studies, I learned about all these people. This is the timeline I put together for this year's study. And here are all the maps that they either drew on their own, because they are doing that. They're tracing certain things on their own. Or whether I gave them a map, like the map that I loaded up earlier, and had them do mapping skills and labeling from it. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you like this video, please share it and subscribe. Until next time, shalom.